was surprising. But back in the 80s, we had an influx of immigrants from Cambodia. They were refugees from the Vietnamese War. And there'd always been talk about immigrants and, how bad they were. But after some initial hesitations, there are, several dozen of them that were here for sort of getting used to America before they were sent to different places. People really welcomed them very warmly after they got to know them for a day or two. And I was glad to see that. We took them to basketball games and, big dinners. And they had fun. They had fun. Before the Cambodians came, because that was way after the war, they had been a tribe that had fled from the war into the mountains of Cambodia. But before that, we had quite a few Vietnamese refugees. The Apex Rotary Club and the Apex Baptist Church would sponsor families. And I remember one, Luong Nguyen and his family came. 3 of his boys had gotten out by boat from Vietnam and then Thailand and Hong Kong and on to here. And, people were all concerned, would they be on welfare? Well, he was working at Henry Wurst, which was a big printing company at the time. And within about 2 months, he was completely self-supporting. His 3 boys were all great violinists, and now they're high-tech people. But there was one big problem, and that is his wife and youngest child had not been able to escape by boat. They had been stopped. Well, after about 10 years of trying through diplomatic channels, we finally got his wife and youngest child come to America, and they were really happy to be here. Luong, of course, came as a Buddhist, and he had been an officer in the South Vietnamese Army. So, the Vietnamese didn't want him there. But he became a Christian, and after that actually became a Baptist pastor in Savannah, Georgia, for a group of Vietnamese. And they've had a really wonderful life, and like most immigrants, they made the very best of it. And we remember that very fondly. Now, today, all my grandchildren went through the public schools in and around Apex. And we are just swamped by immigrants from all parts of the world. Indians, Pakistanis, Chinese, Hispanics, and all my grandchildren are learning different languages. And so, Apex has changed. I don't know how many languages are spoken in Apex today, but I would bet it's a couple of dozen. I initially came here knowing almost no one, but my wife's relatives were from here, and so a uncle of an uncle hired me, and I enjoyed that. But I found through the years that all those relationships were much deeper than I ever knew, so that by the time I finished figuring who all the people to whom I was related through my wife, there was lots and lots of them. So then, after that, my family, her family, started moving here, the ones who weren't already here. And so, I noticed this is what a lot of people do. They follow their grandchildren. And Apex is made up now of so many grandparents. The reason I know this is for a living, I do house closings. And so we talk about family as they come and why they came. And many times it's just to follow the kids. It's just a normal place. Not too many crazy people, but enough to make it interesting. And we don't do wildish things to get people to come. I always like to brag that we were the only really prosperous city that had never bribed a company to come here. I think we've bribed one or two now, but some part of my academic and legal and legislative work was in showing how foolish the bribes are and how other things are what attracts people. And your listeners, I'm sure, realize that I believe it was 2016 that we were declared the #1 place in the country to live for value. And that was done without bribing anybody. I was real proud of that. When I came here, Apex was less than 3,000 people. I came in '76, and on the map, the part of Apex was big as my hand. Now, Apex, I can't even put my arm around it. So a lot of people think when you've gained population that it means you become a lot more dense. And that's not the case. We haven't become that dense. We've just spread out over the countryside. When I first came here, I lived in a trailer about 2 or 3 miles outside town. And you could see all the stars on a bright night, hear the railroad train whistle. And now you can't see any more lights. But you, instead of having one place to shop for groceries, you have 10 or 15. Instead of one doctor at the time, there's dozens. And so we have a lot more choices very close in. We don't have to travel nearly as far. And it's hard to get into a traffic jam while you're in Apex. Now to go somewhere else, that's a different subject. So I'm hoping that we can still maintain that same density, that is not real heavy density, but on the other hand, a lot of woods and streams and forest all around. I have 9 grandchildren now, and I've taken them on so many walks through Apex, and they love to see it. And sometimes we'll go to 5 playgrounds on one afternoon. There's so many. I represented the town of Apex for 16 years in the General Assembly. And during those 16 years, it was sometimes included with Knightdale or sometimes with Cary or whatever. But it always included Apex. And I felt the people were very nice to me here, even though they disagreed with me sometimes. And it wasn't like the hollering, screaming stuff that you see on TV. And I worked real hard at it. When Apex needed something, I would really ask them, do you really need that? If they said yes, I'd try to get it for them. But a lot of times they didn't really need it. So I don't think I ever brought any pork barrel back to Apex. My feeling about that was we were one of the most prosperous cities in the entire state, and I don't know if I was above it, but I thought the town was above it. So if they didn't get any pork, now we did get a few road repairs, but that's acceptable. 50 years ago, for the 100th anniversary, I came to the Apex Parade. We didn't live here yet, but some of my family lived here. And there was a little book written about the history of Apex by my law partner, to-be law partner, Carl Holloman, and his boys, Warren and Toby. Pluck, perseverance, and paint. In other words, it took work and determination to make Apex. And about 40 years later, they did a second edition, which I love, and I give it away to people who've lived here a long time. And it's good because it has a lot of the really old people, much older than me, telling the stories of what it was like in the old days. There's one story that I want to tell that's not in here, and I think it illustrates that no matter how good a city or community is, it's got its bad parts too. We had in about 1950 a really aggressive chief of police, I think Sam Bagwell was his name, And he was brought in specifically to cut down on crime. Well, he colluded with a deputy sheriff, I don't know the sheriff's name, to lynch a guy named Lynn Council to try to force a confession out of him for robbery. Well, they didn't kill him, but they did string him up and almost killed him, and he never confessed because he didn't do it. But he still has the scars, and he's still living near Apex, and I was real proud that the town and the Wake County Sheriff apologized for that in a big ceremony and created a memorial to Lynn, a good place where he could sit in front of the police station if he ever wanted to. And I think it's a good thing to say when you did wrong. Not enough people do that. But that's part of our history too.